Welcome to the Tech Mind Factory video blog. I'm super excited that you visited my channel. I hope you will find this video helpful and interesting. If so, please subscribe at the end because this will be the sign for me to produce more videos. And now, enjoy watching. This is another video from the series Be a Better Azure Developer. In this video, we will talk about software architecture diagrams. I think that this topic can be interesting for you because this topic is not so broadly discussed. When we look at different solutions, we have solution architecture, so different components like for Azure solution, we can see different diagrams using Azure services. But when talking about software, it's not broadly discussed how to create architecture diagrams and how to document it. That's why today we are going to talk about a great tool called Structurizr that enables you to create software architecture diagrams. Okay, let's jump in. When talking about solution architecture diagram, we are not talking about software architecture. So as you can see on the left side, there is a small solution architecture of document analyzer solution. So we can see that there is some logic app, some function app, form recognizer or Cosmos DB. And we can see how those components work together. That's fine. But we would like to also document and create architecture for the software. So in this case, solution architecture is not software architecture. So on the right side, you can see that here we have a fragment from the software architecture. This is the diagram that presents different components used in our solution when it comes to software. So we have some file controller, some file processing channel, production controller, messaging background service. So we can see some details related with the software. Okay, so when talking about software architecture diagrams, it's worth to mention about different hierarchy of abstractions. So visualizing the hierarchy of abstractions is done by creating a collection of contexts, container, component, and optionally code using UML class diagrams, for instance. And this is where C4 model gets its name from. So we have different 4 levels. Level 1, System Context Diagram. Level 2, Container Diagram. Level 3, Component Diagram. And Level 4, Optional Code. When we look on the diagram on the right side, we can see those 4 different levels. So the first level, context, is the highest level. So we can see some users, we can see system, external components, and some interactions. But this is the highest level of the abstraction. If we zoom in, we can see containers level, so we can see that user interacts with web applications, mobile applications, how those applications interact with backend, with database or external systems. If we again zoom in, we will see components level. So here we can see details related with backend, for instance. We can see components included in the backend, like controllers in the web API or background services. And then if we zoom in, there will be the 4th level, so the code, and here we can find UML diagrams, for instance, that describe implementation in the classes. Before we jump into details of all of those 4 levels, I would like to also mention about the author of C4 model, so Simon Brown. He's also the author of Software Architecture for Developers, a developer-friendly guide to software architecture. So at the end of this course, I would like to also encourage you to read 2 ebooks that Simon released. But I will talk about them at the end of this video. So let's discuss details related with all 4 levels of C4 model. On the highest level, we have System Context Diagram. A system context diagram is a good starting point for diagramming and documenting a software system. It allows you to step back and see the big picture. So we can see that we have, for instance, on this diagram, a personal banking customer. This personal banking customer interacts with the internet banking system, and this banking system interacts with some external systems like email system or mainframe banking system. So it's the highest level of abstraction. Details isn't important here, as this is your zoomed out view showing a big picture of the system landscape. The focus should be on people, so actors' roles, and software systems rather than technologies, protocols, and other low-level details. Once we understand system context diagram, so how our system fits in the overall IT environment, a really useful next step is to zoom in to the system boundary with a container diagram. So a container is something like a web application, for instance, so single page application like Angular. It can be desktop application, mobile application, database, or backend. Essentially, a container is a separately runnable, deployable unit, separate process that executes code or stores data. The container diagram shows the high-level shape of the software architecture and how responsibilities are distributed across it. So now in this diagram we can see some more details. So again, we have personal banking customer, and this customer interacts with different components like web application. It can be MVC written in the ASP.NET Core. It can be single page application written in Angular, or mobile application. And we can see that all those three apps interacts with the API application, and API is connected with the database. And of course, again, we have some external systems like email system and mainframe banking system. Once container diagram is ready, we can again zoom in and see exactly what is happening in the API application using component diagram. The component diagram shows how a container is made up of number of components, what each of those components are, their responsibilities, and the technology implementation details. So we can see inside the API application here we have, for instance, sign-in controller or account summary controller, and we can see that we are using MVC REST controller, so Spring technology in this case. We have also description, like for sign-in controller, allows users to sign in the internet banking system. And again, we can see some details how those different components interact with each other. Again, once component diagram is ready, we can zoom in to level 4, code. And this level shows how each component is implemented as code. So here we're using UML class diagram. This is an optional level of details, and it's often available on demand from tooling such as integrated development environment. So you can automatically generate those diagrams using, for instance, Visual Studio. Great, that's it about the theory, so let's see the Structurizr tool in action. This is the main page of Structurizr tool. It's available under structurizr.com. What is great about this tool is the fact that you can create diagrams and documentation as code in Markdown, or you can use web browser UI to create diagrams. Before I sign in, I really encourage you to check official documentation and read details about how to create diagrams and some other components. Once we sign in, there is a main dashboard, and here what I can do, I can create a new workspace, and inside this workspace I'm able to create my diagrams. So let me open my current workspace. Here it is, this is my workspace, and inside this workspace I can see that there are 3 diagrams I created before. So let's see some implementation details for these diagrams. I will select Workspace Editor. After a few seconds, Workspace Editor should be displayed. As you can see, there is a tab called Elements, and here I've already defined some elements here. So we can see that inside my workspace I have Azure Developer Starter Pack System, I have some user. There is also container, so Azure Developer Starter API, and I have some different components inside this API, so events, background service, or file controller, for instance. Okay, so let's see how to create those different diagrams. We are going to start with a system context diagram. So in the workspace, we have to add system context. So here, if I click on the workspace, there is a window, and inside this window I have provided the name of the system, description, some tags, and click Add Software System. Once I click Add Software System button, the system will be displayed here on this side. So in this case, I created Azure Developer Starter Pack System. If I get back here and click on the workspace, I can also add person related with this system. So in this case, I added user here. Once I have user created and system, so in this case Azure Developer Starter Pack, I can add some containers. So in this case, I have one container, Azure Developer Starter API. So to do it, left click on the Azure Developer Starter Pack system. And as you can see, in this window, I can provide the name for the new container. I can provide description, technology, tags, and click Add Container button. Once I click Add Container button, Azure Developer Starter API is created. So the container. If I left click on the Azure Developer Starter API here, you will see that then I can provide the name for the different components inside this API. So again, I can provide the name, description, technology, and tags. Once I click Add Component button, this component will be attached to this container. So like events background service or file controller. To edit components or containers, we have to right click on the component or container. So in this case, I will click on the Azure Developer Starter API container, and such window will be displayed. And as you can see, here is the name, Azure Developer Starter API. I can provide description. I can provide also the technology, so I can type ASP.NET Core, for instance. I can provide the URL, and I can click Update. And then here I will have information, as you can see, that this container, so Azure Developer Starter API, was created using ASP.NET Core. Okay, great. So, of course, this is not the end, because we can also create relationship between different components. If I right-click on the user element here, we can see that, of course, there is user defined, but if I scroll down, there is section called relationships. And we can see that I already defined two relationships. So in this case, user is connected with Azure Developer Starter API container, and user is in a relationship with Azure Developer Starter Pack system. And below, if I scroll down, I can also add new relationship. So in this case, I created those two relationships using Add Relationship button. Okay, so let's see this relationship on the diagram. I will close this window and I will go to the Relationships tab. And here I can see all the relations between different elements in my software architecture. So you can see, for instance, that user interacts with Azure Developer Starter API, and also user is connected with Azure Developer Starter Pack system. And of course, this is not the end, because we can also see some relationships between different components inside the container. So in this case, in the Azure Developer Starter API, we can see that file controller is in a relationship with file processing background service and file processing channel. Okay, if I scroll up, here I can go to Views tab, And here what I can do, I can create different types of diagrams. So the system diagram, container diagram, component diagram. So it's available under those different buttons here. I've already created 3 diagrams here. So I have system context diagram, I have container diagram, and component diagram. So let's discuss system context diagram first. To create a system context diagram, system context view, we have to use this button System Context View. If I click it, here I can provide the key for this system context view. It has to be a number. I can provide description, and we have to select scope. So in this case, we will create system context view for the Azure Developer Starter Pack system. Once I click create, this diagram will be displayed here in this dropdown. So in this case, I have system context, Azure Developer Starter Pack. If I scroll down here, I can add elements on this diagram. So in this case, as you can see, I have user here, and this user interacts with Azure Developer Starter Pack system. And as you can see, there is this arrow and information that user uses Azure Developer Starter Pack. Of course, this is a simple relationship just to show the concept. The same thing can be for other types of the diagrams, but before we move forward, it's worth to mention that we can change the colors and shapes of these elements on the diagram. If I scroll down, here is the section called Element Styles. And as you can see, for different elements like component, container, software system, I can select a shape, for instance, background, text color, and some other attributes. The same for the relationships. I can change the color of the arrows for relationships. Okay, so if I scroll up, I can also display container view for Azure Developer Starter Pack. So let me select this one and again discuss how I created it. So here, to create a container view, container diagram, we have to click container view button. Again, we have to provide numeric key, description, and in this case, this container view will be created for the Azure Developer Starter Pack system. So once I click create button here, this container view will be displayed in the drop down. And again, if I scroll down here, what I can again do, I can select which elements I would like to include in this diagram. So I selected them and clicked update button. And right now we can see that in this diagram here, I have user, and I can see the interaction between user and Azure Developer Starter API. Of course, this is the API. In the real world, we can use web application or mobile application here, just to show this interaction between the system and the user. And again, as you can see, also in the section called relationships, we can see that there is a relationship between user and this API. And again, to include this relationship, I have to select it and click update button. Great. So that was for the container view, but also we can create component view using component view button. So if I click it here, I have to again provide the key, description, and select for which container I would like to describe components. So in this case, I will describe components for the container called Azure Developer Starter API. So I will describe components inside my API. Once I fill these details, I can click create button. If I click create button, this component view will be visible in the drop-down. Now, if I scroll down here in the element sections, as you can see, I have much more elements than before. Again, I selected them, clicked update button, And on the right side, I can see this diagram with different components inside my API. So here we have file controller, product controller. There is also real-time messaging hub. There is messaging background service, storage service, event background service. So many different components used in my API. Let me present this solution in the Visual Studio, so this project. If I open Azure Developer Template Starter API here in the Infrastructure project, you will see that those services, like for instance storage service, are included here. So there is a storage service. If I expand the API project here, we will also see that there are background services, so events background service, a messaging background service. If I expand hubs folder, there is also real-time messaging hub that we included in the diagram. Okay, great. So as you can see, we can quickly create these diagrams here using Structurizr. And again, if I scroll down, of course, we can change the styles for the elements and relationships. If I scroll up here, I would like to briefly discuss some other sections here. So there is also a section called documentation, and here we can create documentation using Markdown, and of course we can use text, we can use Markdown, and we can embed those diagrams we created before. And there is also a section called decisions. And in the decisions, we can add, this is architecture decision record. So the approach to document decisions we made during creation of our project, during the implementation. So here I can click Add Decision button and I can provide title, format, so Markdown for instance, and I can also include the element for this decision, so Azure Developer Starter Pack in this case. And if I click Add, this decision will be displayed here, and of course I can edit it and I can fill some details related with this decision here, so it's really helpful. If I close this down, it's also worth to mention that we can export those diagrams from our workspace. To export diagrams as images, we have to go to the workspace dashboard again, scroll down, and in the diagram section we can see all the diagrams we created. So I will click Component Diagram for Azure Developer Starter Pack, and here is the view of my diagram, and I can click here Export Diagram and Key Legend to PNG image. If I click it, I can select which diagram I would like to export. So in this case I would like to export component diagram, and I can click Export Selected Diagrams. And right now it's being downloaded and I can display it, and as you can see this is PNG image, and of course I can include this image in other documentation parts. Of course, this was only the quick overview of Structurizr, and I really encourage you to check it in details and check Getting Started documentation, where you will find guide to using Structurizr. It's also worth to mention that you can start using this tool for free. At the end, I would like to also encourage you to read 2 ebooks from Simon, creator of C4 Model and Structurizr tool, so Software Architecture for Developers Volume 1 and Volume 2. Inside these books you will find many interesting details and explanations related to software architecture. I included all the links in the video description. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you found it interesting and helpful. If you have any additional questions, do not hesitate to contact me either on Twitter or LinkedIn. And of course, I encourage you to visit my blog techmindfactory.com. See you in the next video.